Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar from Curo Compensation. My name's Ruth Thomas, and I'm the industry principal and a co-founder here at Curo, and I'm going to be taking you through this webinar today. We run regular webinars covering best practice in compensation and also some sessions where we focus on how our compensation management solutions can support you in the reward challenges that you will face today. But today's session is a best practice webinar, and the focus is on the gender pay gap reporting in the UK. I know we've got a mix of Curo GPG, Curo Enterprise, and non-Curo clients on the call, so welcome to all of you. I hope today's short session will give you a snapshot update of what you need to know to get on with your reporting for 2018. So in terms of our agenda, this is how we're going to approach today. I'm going to start with some brief housekeeping and introductions before moving on to just a wrap-up of the 2017-18 reported figures, so those figures that have been uploaded to the government's Gender Pay Gap Viewing Service. I've shared that information with you before, but I'm just going to do a quick recap for anybody who hasn't been on our previous webinars. I'm going to take a short look at GPG developments in 2018 so far. So there's been a few more initiatives coming out from the government and from different bodies, and we've also sort of seen more of a public reaction to the data that was published back in April. So far, we know that about 269 companies, when I looked yesterday, have done their reporting for 2018. That's been uploaded to the government portal. I've taken some time with a couple of analysts to look at that data, and I'm going to sort of give you my view of what I've seen so far, and then conclude the session with some recommendations and tips to get you on your journey for your 2018 reporting. And then open the floor to some questions at the end. So from a housekeeping perspective, you're all on mute currently. And when we get to the part where I open the floor to questions, you'll be able to type in your questions using the chat box that you can hopefully see in the Join Me panel at the top of the screen. And I will endeavour to answer those. I'm being helped by my BDR, Savannah, so she may help with those questions as well. We are recording the session, so you can request a link to the recording at the end of the session, and we also are happy to provide you with a PDF of the deck that I'm running through with you today. So let's just get on to a quick introduction to those of you who don't know who we are at Curo. So we're a compensation management technology provider, and we provide a number of solutions to help leading companies drive their business and talent outcomes. We're a point solution, so we're not part of a broader HCM suite, but we're a compensation specialist that many of our clients choose to integrate with their existing HRIS or HCM platforms. And our clients choose to work with us because of the expertise around compensation that's embedded in our products, and we take compensation seriously. And here are a few of the leading clients with whom we work. And if you'd like to find out any more about Curo and our products and the people that we work with, then please do get in touch. And there's some contact details at the end of this session. But the one product that's probably relevant for today that I'll just spend a short moment talking about is our GPG solution. So I know some of you on the call are users of GPG or have logins to GPG. So this was a solution that we released to the market in January this year. It was very much initially designed to be an easy self-service solution for those smaller companies who would need to comply with the regulations last year, but they may not have the resources to do so. And we had many small companies signing up to use our service. Now we're in year 2 of the reporting. We're talking to many more larger companies, some of our Curo clients, and many other companies who may have gone to seek external advice or had external support in year 1, but they now want to move more towards self-sufficiency or a more cost-effective way of doing their reporting, and so they're moving on to the Curo GPG platform. And for those that don't know about the platform, it's a self-service solution, so it's not like our other products. And what it does is it allows you to upload multiple data sets, so that can be through the year or just your statutory report annually, and you can track progress over the year by doing comparisons between those data sets. There's an inbuilt set of advanced analytics. I'm going to share a few screenshots later in my presentation that help to provide insight behind your headline statutory figures, and that will hopefully give you the information you need to support any narrative that you're producing. We've also incorporated national benchmarking into that product, so we download the data from the government website nightly. And what we're aiming to give you is basically a consistent and accurate reporting for each data set. Because I know for some of you, you've had certain personnel that have created reports or created Excel sheets. They may have gone or moved on, and so it's hard to guarantee that consistency in reporting. Whereas obviously using the Curo product, you get that. And we're continually monitoring what's going on. And I'm going to talk about some of the anticipated changes today. We're looking, for example, at bringing the ethnicity reporting into the product very soon. But we are, committed to keeping the functionality in the product in line with legislation. So just quickly, we offer the service at 3 levels: basic, advanced, and premium. The basic service is really for those just wishing to comply with the legislation and do the statutory metrics, and they're able to download a PDF report with their outcomes. The advanced is for the user who wants to get access to analytics and upload multiple legal entities, for example. And the premium service is for those larger corporations who need to report on a cumulative basis, an aggregate basis, and also a by legal entity. And so it gives you more reporting functionality. And we also offer some additional services along with that to support you. So we can help you with some basic consulting and advanced consulting if you need help understanding your numbers or producing a narrative and action plan. And also if you need any data management support, we can assist with that too. Okay, so that's enough of a plug about Curo. Let's get on to the content for today. So 2017-18, let's see where we ended up for the first deadline period. So I'm sure most of you are aware the Equality Act 2010 regulations came into effect as of the 6th of April 2017, and employers had to report by the 5th of April this year, or the 31st of March in the case of the public sector. And we're now obviously already into the second year of reporting, because the snapshot date for this year was, again, the 5th of April 2018 and the 31st of March for anybody who's in the public sector. And in terms of what we saw, well, there was over 10,500 companies who actually reported in the end by the deadline, which was quite a surprise in the end. I think the flood of numbers that came into the end, you can see there was definitely a rush to the finish line with over 1,000 firms reporting on the last day. And it was anticipated about 500 firms actually missed the deadline date. We were not expecting that level of reporting. I think probably something to do with the fact that the EHRC released very late in the day in March their enforcement regulations, sort of made a lot of people sit up and decide that they needed to quickly get their numbers in. But it's worth noting, looking at the reported figures, that there were 271 companies with under 250 employees who voluntarily reported. So there was no requirement for them to report, but they perceived it was best practice. Not surprisingly, with the rush to the finish line, there was sort of some question over the quality of the data that has been uploaded. And there are sort of, when you look at the data, I think there are at least 61 people who reported having exactly a 0 gender pay gap at both mean and median measures, which is statistically implausible. So I think that's an area of focus for the EHRC at the moment in terms of their enforcement. And I know a number of our clients I've spoken to, they've had communications from the EHRC, just checking that their numbers were right, particularly if they had a negative pay gap or a big difference in their numbers. We know that at least 216 people altered their data a number of times. So in order to try and get the data right onto the portal. So I think overall, the experience at the end of year one was really very much a focus for many on just getting the numbers done and getting the numbers uploaded in line with the reporting deadline. And what those numbers show is that the gender pay gap in favour of men is both widespread and often substantial, with only 12% of reporting companies actually having a pay gap in favour of women. And in the end, we ended up with the overall mean hourly pay figure of 14.3% and the median hourly pay figure at 11.8%. So that's a figure that's across the whole population that uploaded. And so you can benchmark yourself against that relative to your pay gap data. And if we look at the industry sectors reported there, those with the widest gaps at the top there, finance, construction, mining, are probably not a surprise. But I guess what is more of a surprise is that no sector pays women more than men on average. And although during year one, a lot of the reporting there was this potential scaremongering about league tables within sector or benchmarking within sector, I think, while that is relevant to some degree, I would recommend that not becoming a diversion for people. I think it's more important to look at the quality of your numbers and the issues that are facing you as an organisation, how you're addressing that and explaining that in your narrative, and how you're addressing that in your action plan, rather than, saying, well, my numbers are quite good compared to my sector. I think it's more important to look at overall that, what your numbers mean to your organisation. And then just to finish off on the other statutory metrics, so the average bonus gap figures were much more mixed, but 63% of companies, the bonus gap was in favour of men, despite the fact that the proportions of men and women receiving bonuses in organisations were comparable. And then if we look at the proportion of men and women in each pay quartile at the bottom right corner there, that's pretty much what we expected, lower female representation at higher levels of organisations, which is sort of being used by many or cited by many as the most significant factor impacting their own gender pay gap. So that was where we ended up at the end of 2017-18. Since then, the response to the publication has been significant. Obviously, considerable media interest continues to play out daily in the press. But there's also this growing understanding from employees of the outcomes, and also more developments from the government and policymakers. So I was just going to cover a few of those with you next. So in terms of government actions and what we've seen since then, in August, the Government Equalities Office released the findings of a trial to understand how different ways of presenting the gender pay gap figures can affect our understanding and attitudes. One of the main reasons they cite for introducing legislation was to increase transparency, and that transparency can be a powerful mechanism for creating accountability and social change. But they said that they'll only achieve that if people can actually understand the figures. And I think, there was a lot of confusion around, the gender pay gap figures. The way that we express it in the UK is very different from how it's sometimes expressed globally, and particularly in the US, where we see a lot of headlines coming out. It's more common to express it in a monetary value. So in the US, you always hear, women are paid 72 cents on the dollar. And then interestingly, then the findings of this study was that by translating the gender pay gap figures, percentages into monetary terms and providing benchmark data, it gave the best understanding and positive perceptions of gender pay gap figures. I've included in all of these reports that I'm going to mention the hyperlinks so you can get access to those. This example here, the bottom right, is from their report. So this is how they're suggesting is a positive way of being able to present your figures in a way that people understand them. Although I think if I was the Fictionary Gover Limited here, I'm not sure I'd want to do that, because it's showing that I'm obviously below my sector average and below the 100 best performing employers in the sector. But I think we get the message in terms of, showing the monetary translation. And this other picture here, this other snapshot is actually from the Curo portal. This is what we will produce, and we updated our system-generated text to include a more monetary definition to help people to understand, in line with this study, how the numbers are playing out from actually a monetary perspective. A lot more focus coming down the line on action plans, which I'm going to continue to talk about during this short session. But in late August, again, the Government Equalities Office published guidance on actions to close the gender pay gap. It's a short document. It lists 3 sort of buckets of actions: effective actions that they say have been tested in the real world settings and they found to have a positive impact, positive actions that are having some impact but need more research, and then some actions that they say have mixed results, so they've shown to have both a positive and sometimes negative impact. But they are a useful resource for you if you are wanting to consider what type of actions should I be thinking about or undertaking. But I think the important thing to do, I had someone ask me the other day, well, what actions should I be doing? What action should I be implementing? I think you need to look at your numbers and understand your numbers. And when you understand your numbers, it should become more evident of what you should be doing. So if it is a female representation issue and that's the biggest cause of your gender pay gap, then you're going to be needing to look at career progression and recruitment of women in your organization. If your numbers are in a negative pay gap in favor of men, then there are other issues that you're probably going to need to go and look at in your organization. So each person's action plan, each organization's action plan really needs to be personal and relative to your numbers and your company's situation. This report that came out from the Parliament's Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee, the BIS Committee, this is a really useful report. It's quite long, but it is worth a read. I've included the link there. But I think the recommendations that they have in this paper are maybe the best indication of what we might see coming down the line in the future. And so from a best practice perspective, it's worth you considering this now. So I'll just quickly run through those key recommendations. So the fact that narratives should be compulsory. So in the 2017-18 reporting period, over 25% of the companies that reported didn't include any hyperlink to a narrative, so they provided no narrative. And then a large proportion of the other narratives were actually just to the company website. So there were a significant number of people that didn't create any form of narrative to tell their story, basically, and that is definitely a missed opportunity. And so I think this recommendation here is great. I think if you only do the numbers, you've done 25% of the job, and really understanding the numbers and explaining the numbers and coming up with an action plan, are the other 3 key actions that you should consider. There was a lot of ambiguity around who fell in and out of scope of the legislation. Apparently, the government and the GEO does not have a definitive list of who is in scope. Apparently, the only person that does have that is the pensions regulator, and then we're not able to share that with them due to data protection reasons. But I think they're now saying we've got to tighten up on this. We need to know who should be reporting, so that no one falls out under the radar. And also there was a call really to end legal uncertainty around the EHCR's enforcement powers, potentially providing for specified fines for non-compliance. Then there were some reporting recommendations. They're saying that the information on the salary quartiles should be changed to deciles. Now, I'm not sure. I think that's a good idea if you're to do that internally within your organisation, because it will give you a greater level of granularity into understanding where you might have pay equity issues. I think when it comes to publicising that, we may have some data protection issues, and because it will make the data potentially, very transparent in smaller organisations, particularly. So we'll see where that one goes. However, I do agree with this point around publishing part-time and full-time statistics. I think it is important to get that out there. We know that there's a significant difference between the full-time hourly rate and the part-time hourly rate, and we know some of the causes of that. But I think we should be getting that out in the open so that we're addressing that as an action item too. I think bonus calculations being amended to be on a prorated basis will be welcomed by everybody. I think we all, that was a clear flaw in the initial legislation regulations. So that will be great if they decide to change that. This has been anticipated, reducing the qualifying threshold to 50 employees in 2019-20. So if you are a company under 250 employees, you should probably start reporting now, so you can at least see what's going on in your organisation and get ahead of the game. I think review how partner pay is reported was sort of in response to the perception and the reality that a number of companies potentially hid senior employees, chose not to report to partners because they weren't, in theory, within the legislation. And I know, we've heard the horror stories of people moving senior employees into other legal entities so that they didn't have to be included in the numbers. So I think there's a call for sort of control around that. There is this call, I'm going to mention it on the next slide, for reporting by disability and ethnicity by 2020. And that is now legislation that we're anticipating coming down the line. And interestingly, this thing around REMCOMs using KPIs for reducing and eliminating their pay gaps and reporting on these, having much more rigor for companies around what they intend to do to close their pay gap, and having that monitored at a REMCOM or a board level with a much stronger governance around it. So I think they were all really interesting recommendations, and the report, if you have time, it's definitely worth a read. And finally, in terms of governance actions, we now know that CEO pay is going to be coming onto our agendas from January next year. So again, companies of 250 employees or more are going to have to publish and ultimately justify the gap between their CEO and their average worker salary. It's still subject to parliamentary approval, but we're expecting companies would have to start reporting their pay ratios by 2020. And in August, actually, I think it was just a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we saw the HRC putting out their call for ethnicity and disability pay gap reporting. I think we have seen a number of high-profile companies reporting their ethnicity, and that will be severely hampered by the fact that only 3% of UK companies appear to currently be measuring ethnicity. And I know there's a lot of debate around the reporting mechanism, whether we use the binary white, non-white approach or some other approach. And I think that needs to be sort of agreed quite quickly. But we will see reporting by other protected groups coming out in the near future. So beyond those sort of government actions, we've seen that pay equity is becoming increasingly important as a reputational issue for companies and benchmarking companies. We've seen investors taking increasing interest in this, seeking companies to disclose sort of a broader range of information, including their pay gaps. And we've seen the first investment fund launch back in May this year, aimed at encouraging gender diversity amongst UK firms from Legal & General. So their Girl Fund will favour shares in firms that have the best record on gender diversity. The numbers and what people have read in the press have definitely raised employee awareness. I mean, there was a growing demand for pay transparency anyway, but those figures are very much in the public domain, and they can influence who an employee chooses to work for. And there is research from Business in the Community that's shown that 92% of people use gender pay gap information, or would use gender pay gap when looking at a job. So if when someone's choosing to come to work to you, one of the first things they may do is to go onto your website, and read your gender pay gap report. And for a lot of employers, it's very hard to find that gender pay gap report. And equal pay and pay gaps have really become a part of everyday conversations and psyche. They're being used I've seen them used in job adverts. They're being used as PR for products and services. And the example that I'm showing here I thought was quite clever. It was from the Australian version of Marie Claire magazine. And to mark Equal Pay Day in Australia, they brought together 30 popular brands to offer a discount that was equal to the gender pay gap percentage. So just, an interesting way of playing off equal pay, pay equity, gender pay as a marketing tactic. So, as I said earlier, it is hard to believe it's actually time to report again already. But, the snapshot date, as I said earlier, was back in April. And what we've seen so far, when I looked yesterday anyway, 269 companies or legal entities have reported so far. So that's only 3% of the expected number of people that will report. Very few large employers have published their data yet. It doesn't mean they haven't done their reporting, obviously, just they haven't uploaded it to the portal. Speaking to many people, many clients and many companies, I know that a lot of people were focusing on sort of doing this reporting in July and August, ready to sort of tackle the issues in September and create their reports ready to publish later in the autumn. We did some analysis over the submitted data and had a look at some of the reports that have been published. To be honest, it doesn't really make great reading. There was very little progress in any of the numbers. Now, we weren't necessarily expecting that because, as we know, many of the issues that are required to fix the gender pay gap are longer term, not pay-related issues. There seemed to be a lot of confusion for some companies. We seem to have the same numbers submitted as last year. Not quite sure, whether that's correct, whether they just uploaded last year's numbers. They were confused about the reporting dates. Again, a lot of people submitting numbers with no narrative. As I keep saying, that's really a missed opportunity. A few of the larger employers who have shown their narrative and reports, when we went through those trying to analyze them, they weren't very consistent. It was very hard to make year-over-year comparisons, and for some of them it may be because the gender pay gap hadn't got any better. And so maybe people didn't publicly want to say that. But I think, you really need to think about how you're reporting this on a year-over-year basis and making it easy for investors, for employees, for people considering joining your company, for the press, for everybody externally to understand your figures and how they compare year-over-year. You can try and hide them, but, good investigative journalists will be able to find where you've ended up, and you will probably end up a story, in the Evening Standard or the Metro if you're not careful. So, I think, and the other point there, I guess, is that part of the legislation was that you did need to publicize your numbers on your website, and those had to be, ultimately, you had to retain 3 years of numbers. So, you need to make sure that on your company website you are showing last year's numbers and this year's numbers, and you're going to have to decide how you're going to present that. And, once again, really a lack of action plans. I know for many people who reported very late for the 2017-18 period, there was no real time for them to put an action plan in before the next reporting date. And I sort of look at it as a 2 or 3 year journey for employers. I think year 1 was all about getting the numbers in, getting the numbers right. I think year 2 needs to be much more about getting your action plan and getting KPIs in of how you're going to move forward on your action plan. And sort of by year 3, we should start to see, the journey that you're on as an organization and how you're progressing the gender pay gap within your company. So in terms of reporting tips, I've mentioned a few already. I guess we'll start with sort of analyzing the numbers. You can do your statutory metrics, that's fine, but you're not really going to understand them unless you start to go down this route of understanding, for example, stripping out bonus pay from ordinary pay. For those of you that have bonuses paid in the snapshot period, and they're included in the hourly pay calculation, we know they can have a skewing factor, so it is worth seeing what impact that has on your numbers. Doing this part-time to non-part-time comparison, having a look at the impact of seniority and tenure in your organisation, doing an analysis by age, obviously breaking the numbers down by employee groups to see whether you've got geographic or occupational issues driving the pay gap, having a look at bonus schemes, particularly where they're based on a percentage of salary. I think if you take a read of the John Lewis gender pay gap report that they published, they talk very openly about how, because we all know, how their partnership bonus scheme works, because their bonus is paid every year to everybody as a percentage of salary, then it just sort of perpetuates the gender pay gap where they have, more men in senior positions, and so that's skewing their gender pay numbers. Have a look at the impact of allowances, particularly on historical allowances where they've been bought out. I think the police force, the Metropolitan Police gender pay gap is a good example of that one. If you take a look at that one, when they did the analysis, they saw that a large proportion of the gender pay gap, obviously other than representation, was down to historical allowances that were brought out as far back as 15 years ago, but they were overtime allowance that more men than women received, and that has why a lot more men were being paid higher than women. We know about the impact of salary sacrifice. It's interesting that the BIS hasn't said about addressing that in recommendations for change in the regulations. This can definitely, influence the final gender pay gap data, depending on how many women compared to men have taken up benefits via salary sacrifice arrangements, because it can end up creating an artificially lower rate of pay for women. And, trends show that more women tend to take up salary sacrifice benefits like childcare vouchers or additional leave, unpaid leave, to undertake caring responsibilities. So it is worth sort of doing that analysis to see what impact that you have. But beyond that, it's definitely worth looking at all your pay policies. I mean, the number of reports I read last year that said, our gender pay gap is not a pay issue. It is to do with issues around representation and hiring, for example. But I think I would challenge any organisation on that, because I think if you look long and deep into all your pay approaches, your pay tactics, you will probably find some form of discrimination, be it indiscreet or unintended. So, things like bonus KPIs, the measures that go into your bonus scheme, perhaps you have measures there that are based on the chargeable hours. And, there is an issue around chargeable hours. If you are part-time, or I know they get prorated, but, there are cases where we have seen KPIs have had sort of unintended bias built into them, because it is more likely that men will be able to achieve a higher outcome against those KPIs than women. Things like looking at eligibility for schemes. Is there anything in the eligibility for schemes that could cause discrimination or pay equity issues? Particularly looking at out-of-cycle increases, the number of out-of-cycle increases that have happened in your company during the year. And then looking particularly at new hire salaries and pay increase rates for promotions. So that, there is a lot to cover here, but you really sort of need to go through that depth of analysis to really understand what's going on in your numbers. And our advanced analytics platform, which in the Curo GPG product, does a number of those analyses for you. So we look at gender pay by quartile, age, and a number of other metrics. So that will be run against each data set, and you can export those that data from the platform. But it's, and we provide system generated text with that as well. So it's trying to help you on an automated basis understand the underlying issues that you've got going with your statutory metrics. So 2018 reporting tips. Definitely start early. Don't leave it to the last minute again this year, because you'll just be in the same position again next year in terms of really creating actions and being able to make progress on those actions that will ultimately have an impact on your numbers year over year. I talked earlier about consistency in reporting year over year. It is interesting now, we've got these 2 years of data. obviously from a statutory perspective, you're going to be reporting on the people in seats as at the 5th of April, and they won't be the same potentially as the year before. So it is worth potentially doing a year-over-year analysis and understanding where you may have had population changes, like consider the impact of things like corporate restructuring. It may be, if you lost a couple of senior women in your top pay quartile, that will probably have a significant impact on your gender pay gap figures. So, you need to probably think about the data sets from year over year in order for you to explain whether, the numbers have got better or worse, for example. And on that point, you may expect the numbers to get worse before they get better, but you need to understand why that's happening and explain that to people. So if you've gone down an approach, for example, of hiring more women at the bottom end of the career pipeline, then that will probably skew your numbers because you've got more women in the lower pay quartile. And although that's done with good intent, it will have an impact on the numbers. So, but you can explain that you've gone about the process of trying to feed the pipeline with more women, for example. It is going to become increasingly more important to demonstrate progress on actions. So you want this traceability year over year in terms of your action plans. And, in all of this, there's a lot to explain. So narratives really are the key. So if you haven't done one, this is the year really to start thinking about preparing a narrative. Looking back at last year's, I've shared these with people before, those people that have been on the gender pay gap webinars, but I'll just quickly touch on these again. When it comes to creating narratives, I think it's really important to be authentic about your numbers. There were a lot of cases where people were trying to hide numbers last year. I took TUI as a good example. They're a company with a number of legal entities, one of them being an airways, and we know the issues associated with airlines due to the lack of female pilots. Now, they could have aggregated their numbers, which actually were positive, and just hid behind that, but they chose not to. They chose to be authentic, be transparent, and show the numbers by each legal entity. And then they actually had an action plan of what they were intending to do in the different legal entities, because there were different issues going on in those different businesses. I said earlier that some companies said it wasn't anything to do about pay. Hugo Boss is a really interesting example. They were the one company that probably changed their numbers the most in terms of getting them right. But in their narrative, it's a great report to go and read. They actually did talk about areas of their pay approaches where they could see potentially unintended discrimination occurring. So the people that were making the most money from commission were male employees, because they were selling menswear suits, and menswear suits are their highest, the highest number of products that they sell. So sort of unintentionally, men were getting a better deal out of this. So I think, they were thinking about how they could go away and address that. And they also considered the fact that a lot of female employees worked part-time in store entry roles, and they weren't eligible for commission compared to their full-time colleagues. And because there were more women, obviously part-time, then there were a lot less women getting commission. So that's an example where I was talking about really trying to look at your pay policies and approaches and just checking out any discrimination issues that might be going on. And Weetabix is my sort of favourite example from their last year's report. They actually started their reporting publicly the year before in 2016, but this is a great example of showing the journey. Now, when I've shown this before, I have said, if their numbers had gone the wrong way, maybe they wouldn't have done this. It'll be interesting to see what their numbers say this year. But it is, it does show that the journey that they're taking. They talk about the measures that they've taken to make those changes in numbers from 2016 to 2018. And this is an approach maybe you want to think about in your organisation. So in summary, the best narratives were definitely clear and succinct, honest and authentic. They definitely went beyond the figures to explain them. They embraced the need for change. They weren't afraid of it. They were prepared to say that there were things that they needed to do as an organisation. They set clear goals, and what's going to be more important this year is explaining your journey, explaining your year-over-year figures. So I would hope that you can consider all of that when you get on to creating your narratives for this year. So I guess, my 3 points are this year focus on being accurate, being authentic, and taking action, so getting those action plans going. And if you need help, if you think you need help with that in terms of doing the reporting, then obviously get in touch with us and we can give you a demonstration of the GPG platform and you can consider whether that's something that's useful for you. If you're a GPG user and you think you're struggling with it, then get in touch and we can help you with that. And then before I open the floor to questions, I'm just also going to mention an October think tank that we're running with My Family Care. This is up on our Curo events page on our CuroComp website. And this is really an exciting opportunity to come and join a number of thought leaders. We have some great speakers coming, practitioners from ARUP and UBS, and they're really going to be starting to look at some of the issues behind the pay gap that you might want to consider in terms of incorporating into your action plans. And that is it from me, I think. So I am going to open the floor to questions. So for those of you that joined later, if you wish to ask a question now, you can type that into the chat box at the top of the screen, hopefully in your Join Me panel, or it will be in your Join Me panel. So if anyone wants to ask a question who would like to be first to ask a question, please fire away, and I'll let you type those questions in. If you don't want to type a question in here, fine. You can get in touch with us afterwards if you have any questions, either through the info at Curo GPG, or you can get in touch with me at Curo. Okay, so that's one question come in, is if my pay gap has got worse, what do I do in terms of publicly reporting? Well, I think, be authentic is the first point, and understand why it's got worse. And then try and explain what caused it to get worse, and then what you're going to do about fixing that. And I think if you are authentic about that, and people understand that, then people are more willing to show their understanding of the numbers. Okay, and if anyone has any more questions, just type those in. Again, just a reminder for those of you who might have joined later in the call, we have recorded this, so this will be available through our website, or you can request the link to the recording, and you can also request a PDF version of the deck that I've shared with you today. A lot of those reports that I referenced have got embedded links in, so if you would like those, please get in touch with us as well. I'm just pausing for any more questions. Okay, all right, well, thank you very much all for joining today. Oh, hang on, I've got another one. Right, what do you do if you have an interim consultant in the top role? Well, in theory, you shouldn't include them, well, and they're not defined as an employee under the legislations, and you've confirmed that. Then you shouldn't include them in your statutory numbers, but there's no reason that you couldn't include them, do a set of analysis with them in there, and see what impact that has on the numbers. And if they're a woman and they improve your numbers, then you can talk about that in your narrative. Will the presentation be automatically emailed to employees? Yes, I think we do. Sorry, we do send out. I'm just double checking with Savannah, who's supporting me on this call today. I believe we do. We sent for everybody that came on the call. We will send you a follow-up email, and we'll send you a link to the recording and the deck, and that's got the links to the reports in, so that you can have a read of those. Okay, so the question here is, do you include employees that are eligible for a bonus but receive a zero bonus? Do you count them? Yeah, we went through that this year, and because there's slightly different messages coming out of the government guidelines and the ACAS guidelines, they've now reconciled those, and for the For the bonus figures, the 12-month bonus snapshot figures, you don't include employees who don't get a bonus. So a zero bonus employee doesn't count. Doesn't necessarily 100% make sense to me, but you do not include those employees. And we did an update to our software to reflect that. So the calculations now run by the Curo GPG platform are in line with the ACAS and government guidelines. Okay, I'm going to leave it there then. Last chance to get any questions in. Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks very much for joining. I hope you enjoy the material, enjoy the reading, and good luck with your 2018 reporting. Thank you very much.